If you asked me if I'd be traveling anywhere back in September, I would have sighed and assured you there was no travel in sight. After a year and a half of international border closures and only ankle deep in vaccinations, I was still riddled with the PTSD of lockdown life. Not to mention a ban on all non-essential travel. The good news finally hit and borders were opening to vaccinated travelers with a negative test. Some countries being a lot more easily accessible than others though. Mexico, Costa Rica, the Dominican Republic, and Colombia being some of the most relaxed. It had now been 2 years since I returned to Canada from life abroad in the UK, and I was itching to get my feet wet again across the globe. I had to stop living in fear, and not in fear of COVID, but in fear of being stranded abroad if travel regulations were to change on a dime. Despite the complexities of international travel at this time, I did my research and was already booking a steal of a deal on a flight to Mexico. However, halfway through that trip, I was already booking flights and activities for my next adventure, Colombia. Granted, I barely knew anything about the country aside from the fact that it used to be considered the murder capital of the world at one point, notably the city of Medellin. However, in the past few decades, it's become increasingly more safe. Even as recently as 2021, the major drug lord Otoniel was captured, and his minions were given rehabilitation jobs, many of them now seeking work in the booming tourism industry. The country doesn't like to be remembered for its dark past, so skip past the drug tours out of respect, as interesting as they may seem. They don't want to Hollywoodify and glorify the villains of history. I bounced some ideas around with a friend of mine who grew up in the country, and a couple days later, I had my typical hour-by-hour master plan drafted. Despite the new face of Colombia, she advised to dress casually, ditch the accessories, and keep my phone out of sight to avoid petty theft, which is still very commonplace. With flight prices steadily increasing closer to Christmas, I opted for a shorter 14-day trip, 12 days which were actually usable. This meant sacrificing a few of the bigger detours and saving them for a future trip. Though I do cringe about having to leave things out and going back to a country when there's so many other destinations in the world. So what did I opt out of? Well, there's a super gorgeous church in the south, but it's pretty out of the way and not worth the travel time just for a photo. And it's near a potentially hazardous border with neighboring Ecuador. The Caño Cristales, which is a gorgeous pink river due to this native plant species, but it was the wrong time of year. Also, the ascending snow-capped volcano in the Los Nevados Park, and then trekking and camping in the Tatacoa Desert, and hiking in the Tairona Reserve. They are some pretty big items, but hiking trips eat a huge chunk of time out of a vacation, and I had my eyes set on something even more exciting. Ciudad Perdida, the lost city of the ancient Tairona people. It can be dated back as far as 700 to 800 BC. That puts it around 650 years older than Machu Picchu in Peru. It's a 3 to 5 day hike depending on your fitness level, and I opted to do the 4-day trek and join a handful of other random tourists. The entire trail stretches for 44 kilometers and ascends 2,700 meters worth of elevation gain. At my peak of physical fitness back in Canada, I did Okanagan Mountain Park in 1 day, which virtually mirrored the metrics of this journey. However, the heat and humidity made it exponentially more challenging. Hikers start with their orientation in the tiny village of El Mamey after being carted from Santa Marta, the nearest large city. It's about an hour 45 on the highway plus another 45 minutes on a very rough dirt road. They fed us incredibly well, not what you'd expect for a backpacking trip. Every day we were up before the sun around 5 in the morning, ate a huge breakfast with our guides, and hit the trail at 6. There was always a lot of rice, beans, plantains, fried fish, chicken, beef, and arepa, which are sort of like corn cakes. Compared to the Salento trek in Peru, it felt like glamping, with vendor storefronts speckling the trail all the way to the end. They were offering all the amenities you might have forgotten, like beer, toiletries, Gatorade, chips, and more. And they're all reasonably priced. The beds? While some slept in hammocks, most were bunk beds under covered shelters with full mattresses and mosquito barriers. Flush toilets, cold showers, and even Wi-Fi at all camps ensured the journey could be done by all travelers of all skill levels. The first day was nearly a full sun uncovered 4-hour trek to a camp called Alfredo. I cracked out my deck of cards, rum, and taught some of the other backpackers the internationally famous shithead card game. Day 2 was roughly 7 hours on trail, but we had plenty of stops on the more sheltered route to binge on freshly cut fruit, check our emails, and admire the views. The Wiwa tribe was along the way, and despite enjoying their nearby waterfall for a quick photo op, we did get to learn the basics of their culture. The other tribes of Arhuaco, Kogi, and Canquamo are also along the route. There's a huge reserve encompassing all of these tribal areas, and a national park beyond that. They're well protected. The girls take care of many of the domestic duties, including weaving these beautiful bags they carry around with them everywhere they go. The material is all taken from local plants. The green exterior is scraped away to access the white threads on the inside before creating what is essentially cotton threads. The men carry around something everywhere called a paporo. It's a hollowed out gourd where they mix seashell lime, coca leaves, and spit continually to grow a disc around it. For them, it acts like a spiritual journal. They'll marry as young as 14, and the men will often have multiple wives. They are also a deeply spiritual people who will select a child at birth by divination, almost always a boy, to become the religious leader, to become the mamos, which means son. Him and his mother, they'll eat a strictly white food diet. He'll also spend at least 9 years of his life living in a cave or double-walled thatched hut during the day, only to be taken out at night. The following 9 years, he'll continue his training and verbally receive all of the teachings before being allowed to fully join society. Their housing is traditional round mud brick thatched roof homes, just like the homes of their ancestors. Day 3 was the day we had all been waiting for, and it was only a short 30-minute walk to the cable car that zipped us across the river, and another 20-minute hike up the ancient restored steps to the lost city. The guides gave us a complete walking tour with a breakdown of the history and significance of different areas of the ruins. Apparently, the Spanish conquistadors never actually visited the site, and it was only rediscovered in 1973. The tribes had ensured it was a well-kept secret from outsiders for reasons which were quite clear. Historically, the Tairona people tried to appease the Spanish by giving them some gold. Gold was a huge part of their culture and dress. However, it failed to satisfy their lust for the material. They viewed the locals as barbaric and soulless. Having Wi-Fi at the summit felt fundamentally wrong, and I don't think any of us stooped to that level. But I definitely snuck up a couple beers. We waited for the sun to illuminate the central complex and received the most amazing, stunning, postcard-worthy vista. We stayed there for a while, just taking it all in. We learned about a local leaf that's ground down to a pulp to create some of the coloring used while dyeing their clothes or for applying body paint. We also had a chance to interact with a family that's currently living in the huts at the ruins. Apparently, there's also additional ruins nearby that aren't yet excavated. Using LiDAR technology, they'll never be exhumed due to a restriction from the local tribes. The seaside town of Santa Marta is home to Tairona Park, a hiking destination that also has a number of sailing and snorkeling tours. Unfortunately, I only had the evening there and delved into the very modern and lively strip of shops down 3rd Street, the perfect spot for live music and food. Anywhere in Colombia, make sure to bargain and take about 60% of the original price. I was so desperate though for an iPhone cable on day 1 of my trip, I wound up paying 100,000 mil, or $30 for one. Facepalm. Amateur travel mistake. Always bring your battery backup. I like the ones with the solar panels that are integrated, and also 2 charging cables. Cartagena was the first Spanish colony in the Americas, and it's a seaside town on the north side of the country on the Caribbean. It features the gorgeous stone San Felipe Fort, which makes for a stellar sunset walk and photo op. Café Del Mar is an alternative for a classy sunset dinner. For the vibrant side of the city, stroll through Gethsemane for local artisans, live music, and incredible food. It's the spot to chow down on fresh seafood and also pay a royal price for it too. The viewpoint of the Covenant is an easy skip. It's really not that remarkable, and the Uber and taxi drivers will charge an obscene premium round trip. I also did a historical walking tour around the old city. Littered with churches, restaurants, squares with statues and monuments, your brain will be overloaded with information, but it's a must-do. My favorite experience nearby was the Totumo mud volcano. You'll climb a set of slippery stairs to the top of the short mound and get tossed into a pit of silky goo. In seconds, you'll be grabbed, flipped on your back, and given a massage, if you don't deny it quickly enough. All for a fee. Expect to be nickeled and dimed from the guy who will snag your phone to take photos of you, the guy offering to sand your feet so you have grip on the way down, and the old lady who will strip you down and wash you in the nearby lake. Be vocal or go home with an empty wallet. Many people opt into doing the Rosario Islands boating day tour to see Playa Blanca and other nearby beaches instead of hitting up the local Playa Boca Grande. You'll be lucky if you get more than 2 minutes there of peace and quiet without being sold something. Chairs, umbrellas, liquor, snacks, and even handicrafts. The Rosario Islands tour was much more laid back and included a trip to an ocean bar where visitors wade up to their nipples and have drinks under palm shelters after they float you over a table. Very cool. Colombia is well known for its chicas, cocaine, chocolate, and coffee. One of my favorite stops was Pereira. My mission, a Salento day trip riding horseback and hiking through the lush green coffee fields. If I was more of a coffee lover, I'm sure it would have been a little more amazing, but I learned pretty fast that I'm insanely allergic to horse dander. The tightly integrated wax palm trees, which are the tallest in the world, struck awe into my heart, and they're now the national tree of the country. Unfortunately, they're now endangered due to overharvesting for Palm Sunday and candle making. Medellin, the old murder capital of Colombia, was a surprisingly clean, well-connected, and beautiful mountainside city, with chilly temperatures to match. A solid 10 degrees cooler than the city's north, it felt suiting when I hit up the annual Christmas Lights Festival, which easily beat most of the best displays back home in Canada. Arby Park is an hour cab ride outside of the city and has a plethora of great hiking and cycling trails. For a more chill experience, there's a botanical walk to learn more about the local foliage. Nearby, an adventure park with an aerial course, and more. On the way down, I took a 15-minute gondola over top of one of the more poorer districts for a panoramic view of the city. Finding an Uber going to Arby is easy, but finding one to return would have been virtually impossible. Definitely take the gondola. Like many places in the world, when Uber first descended, there was a huge revolt by local taxi companies. It was even illegal for a while. Police went as far as to impound vehicles when they noticed passengers riding in the rear seats of a private unmarked vehicle. After legalization, Uber drivers were angrily targeted by taxi drivers, who would notice those passengers sitting in the rear and then follow and vandalize the vehicle later. Often Uber drivers will have passengers sitting in the front to help hide from the aggression. There's a few other cute photo stops in town, like the Botanical Garden, a spot to mingle with the locals going for a stroll, Botero Plaza, which has Fernando's sculptures of obese and sexualized adults, the Museo de Antioquia for local art, Museo del Castillo for a castle-like heritage home with gardens, and Pueblito Paisa, a very simple hilltop market with a view. The real gem of Medellin is the day trip to El Peñón de Guatapé. Locals didn't think much of it, and myths were aplenty of how it got there. But once Luis Eduardo Villegas Lopez climbed it in 1954, he fell in love with the views and saw its true value. He bought all the land it sat on, including all of the surrounding properties. Everyone thought he was nuts. But now you can climb its 650 steps for the panoramic view of the lake below. Bogota was the first and last city I spent time in. It's a modern city with some of the most gorgeous heritage areas, like Chorro de Quevedo, which is adorned by gorgeous graffiti art. Nearby, the Selfie Museum for some contemporary Instagram comedy for the kids, and also a short walk to the gondola for Monserrate, the hill overlooking the city. It was a very quick ride to the top. You can stroll past some elaborate statues depicting Jesus' journey to crucifixion, restaurants, and a chapel. The city is bursting with great shopping like the Usaken Flea Market or shops around Park 93. A couple of my favorite eats were the Indian Kathmandu restaurant with its belly dancers, or the Gato Negro for a classy dinner. Just outside the city are two major tourist traps. First, the Salt Cathedral of Zipaquirá, which has undergone a number of design changes over the years, the latest being in 1991. It's an actual salt mine where the miners had created a sanctuary below ground for themselves to pray in. In the first series of chambers, you'll walk through symbolic architecture of Christ's journey to crucifixion. Events are also hosted in a number of other mini-chapels within its confines. An audio tour will make sure you get your English fix for the history of the place, while the Miners and Brine tours are Spanish only. I was so eager to get there that morning that the staff was still showing up at the time I had finished my tour. When exiting, somehow I managed to accidentally take the emergency evacuation route. No one stopped me, and I popped out into the sunlight in an area with a bunch of workers in hard hats who didn't seem to question my authority to be there. My sandals and pants now covered in cave goo. Just like RV Park, it's easy to access via transit or with Uber, though getting back using Uber will be challenging. Plan a return trip with transit. The Uber cost is about US $25 each way. Second, the Salto de Tequendama waterfall to the west of Bogota. While you can't go right down to it, there's a decommissioned heritage hotel turned museum, which is presumably haunted right next to the falls, that has tours on weekends. Story has it people used to commit suicide by jumping off the falls. It is quite the trek to get out to the area, and I suggest either hiring a private driver for $100 or taking a tour. Transit can be very complicated and an Uber basically non-existent. While there, it's a great chance to chow down on some arepas de chocolo, a chocolate corn cake, and other local snacks while you snap photos of the panoramic, romantic atmosphere. There were very few times in Colombia where I needed cash. That surprised me. Almost everywhere was credit-friendly, minus like kiosk vendors, taxis, a couple of restaurants, and all the stops in the Lost City hike. American dollars will be converted at different rates depending on the denomination of the bills. For instance, $21 bills will be a worse rate than one $20 bill. Don't expect many shops to take American dollars directly. They'll quickly direct you to a money exchanger where the rates are atrocious. With less than 4% of the population speaking English, I still managed to get by very well with technological solutions. Cell phone service throughout the country is excellent, and never underestimate the power of body language. When cell phone data did get a little spotty, despite having signal, I learned a trick was to turn on and off airplane mode to reconnect, or choose a different carrier entirely under network selection. The younger demographic also speaks a lot more English courtesy of video gaming, music, and the internet. The Translate to English feature in Safari on the iPhone was also a lifesaver for reading restaurant menus. Also, the camera and conversations mode in Google Translate was great for converting real-life text or vocal communications on the fly. Aside from the other minor safety concerns that I mentioned, there weren't a lot of other things to note. Be wary of vendors trying to slap a not free, bracelet on you, friendly females making good use of legalized prostitution, shady bartenders drugging drinks, and some taxi drivers trying to take advantage of ignorant travelers by quoting astronomical rates at the airport. Often things you have to be careful of in any country. By the time I boarded my flight home, I was left pleasantly surprised with how smoothly the trip went, and how clean, friendly, and modern the entire country was. Not to mention how delicious the food, of course. The fried fish, all the arepas, the cocktails, the chocolate everything, and the mountain-grown coffee. Would I go back? You bet. The country has such a spectrum of activities it would keep any tourist indulged. It can never be fully experienced in 2 weeks, so go for a month and really treat yourself. This is the perfect opportunity to throw away your legacy perceptions of Colombia and see what a beautiful and vibrant country it has become today.